The ladies of GBN finally get to strut their stuff in an all-girls competition in this episode of Gundam Build Divers. Greetings, my friends. Get ready to set your GP base and jump into a virtual world. It's time to look at another episode of Gundam Build Divers, an episode which builds upon the tradition that we've seen in the Gundam Build spin-off series, an episode which is fully dedicated to the female characters in the series. That's right, this episode features an all-girl competition, but it's not going to be your typical Gunpla battle. In fact, it's actually going to be a giant race with tons of obstacles, which just so happen to involve Gunpla, just not in the way that you would actually expect. That being said, this episode itself was okay at best. I kind of felt that this episode would have worked a little bit better if it were in the front half of the series. Considering we're getting very close to the end of Gundam Build Divers, I sort of already expected them to sort of try and set up the big finale of the show, which officially seems like it's going to start kicking off in the next episode. So we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But this episode right here was great for a number of reasons. One, it had some of the best references that I've seen from Gundam Build Divers. A lot of things that only the most hardcore of Gundam fans are actually going to notice. I mean, did anybody else catch that Linkin Park reference? Yeah, it's in this episode, and even though I'm not a really big fan of the Linkin Park band, I thought it was a really nice tribute, especially after the death of their lead singer. But what I really loved about this episode is that we finally got Koichi's sister involved, Nanami, and when she goes into the GBN world, she has a brand new alias, Nami, and she has what is probably the most overdone and ridiculous costume that we've seen in the series thus far. Her actual costume changes the color of her hair, and she seems to have this like weird version of a Federation suit, which is equipped with all sorts of mecha goodness. Basically, she has fully embraced the GBN world and gone crazy with it, and when you stack her up to some of the other characters of the series, they look plain by comparison. In fact, I would go ahead and say that most of the female characters in the show have way more distinctive designs than the actual male characters in the series. But really, this is just sort of an excuse to bring in all of the main female characters and put them in a big competition. So not only do we get to see Nami return, but of course we get to see Ayame and Momo. Even Sarah gets involved here, which is a little strange considering that she herself does not have a Gunpla, although that's not necessarily a requirement of this tournament, but you'd think that you would at least have to meet that minimum requirement in order to be a part of this, but again, we're not going to think about that too much. This is just an excuse to have some fun and poke fun at some of the best parts of the Gundam franchise. We also get to see the return of Rose from Team Hiaki, the team which is led by Hellfire Ogre. And we finally get a little bit of development from her, although she is something of a shallow character, not just in her actual character, but herself. She basically comes across as the super haughty girl who's only into herself, and basically she's kind of dense. She's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. So as I said, this is basically a big competition for all of the female characters in the series, and if they win, they basically end up becoming the spokesperson for Gunpla. They become the Gunpla girl, so to speak. So they're going to appear in promotional material and posters, and be ogled over by all the creepy Japanese dudes on trains. However, what makes this episode interesting is that it's actually centered around a race where they have to go to certain obstacles and perform a task. What's kind of strange about this is that it quite literally is a foot race. They can't use their Gunpla at all, so I really don't see much of a challenge here considering that they're in the GBN world. They're not going to get tired or winded, yet we still see these characters actually doing that in this episode. Do they have like running stats or speed stats or something? I'm not quite sure how any of that works, but if you just forget about it and try not to think about it too much, you'll actually end up getting a lot of enjoyment out of this one. But like I said, the best thing are actually the obstacles that they end up running into. And the first one that they actually do is a Gunpla building competition. When they reach the first checkpoint, they have to choose a Gundam model, which they can actually keep, which is all sorts of awesome, and they have to build it in a small amount of time, and they have to do it completely. Now, while it might be cool to grab a Gunpla that you've never actually, like, owned before, and one that's really complex and cool, it's going to take you hours to build that thing. And the other characters strategically pick the simplest gunpla that they can find. They find Haros, which are basically just little balls. They're really easy to build. Now, what's really funny about this scene is that pretty much every character does this except for Rose. She goes for the Sazabi, which is a very complex gunpla model to build. What's really funny, though, is even though she's sweating about this, she builds this thing in like less than 5 minutes. How is that even possible? Another thing that I liked about this episode is that they highlight a sort of rivalry that Rose actually has with Amelia from Team Avalon, another character who hasn't gotten a lot of development, but again, she's sort of like the exact opposite of Rose in almost every single way. She's way more reserved and polite, and she seems to have aspirations of her own. While she doesn't necessarily want to do this just to become the gunpla girl, by the end, it actually ends up being something really important to her. She also wants to appeal to her teammate Karuna. It's obvious that they have some sort of thing for each other. The next mission that they have is actually a photography competition, and hilariously enough, it is called Gunstagram. Please make this an actual thing, where they have to take already pre-made gunpla and pose them and take amazing pictures with them. When they get enough likes, they're able to move on to the next part of the competition. This is probably my favorite part of the episode, if only getting to see all of the different things that people create and the scenarios, and like I said, that's where you're going to get that Linkin Park reference. We also get to see that throughout this entire competition, there are going to be some secret items that the characters can find, and both Nami and Sarah actually end up finding them by saving this one gunpla that's stuck under a rock. I forgot the name of this thing, but I remember seeing it in the original Mobile Suit Gundam, and it actually ends up affording them some pretty awesome weapons. Then there's the next competition, which is a big gunpla sumo match. Excuse me, it's a puppet gunpla sumo match. Basically, you take your gunpla, you set them down on the GP base just like the old school Gundam Build fighters, and then you have a little sumo match. But it's not like an actual fight, it's more just ramming action figures into each other. And again, Rose messes up. She has a super elaborate gunpla which can't even stand, so it immediately just falls out of the friggin' ring. The last part of the competition is where things start to go completely haywire. Basically, what happens here is that because Sarah is in the competition, all of these glitches are starting to happen around them. The giant lightning storms, the purple thunder and lightning, and it's causing all sorts of chaos. And when they arrive at the next part of the competition, everything has been completely destroyed, and they actually have to construct a bike for one of the characters, and every other character is going to get on their gunpla and have one final race to the finish, which is really breakneck and crazy, but because they actually ended up using their gunpla, they all end up losing. But because they're all such great judges, they allow all of them to win, and they all become the official spokespeople for the Gundam franchise. So what's the rundown on this episode of Gundam Build Divers? While this episode was not necessarily for me, I can definitely get why a lot of people are probably going to enjoy this one. It's a really funny episode, and I really love that they took some time to show us that there's a number of different ways to actually enjoy Gundam models. It's not just battling with them. Whether it's building, taking pictures with them, or quite simply just comparing them to other gunpla, there's a number of different ways to actually appreciate these things. This was an episode that I really think highlighted that in a very great way. That being said, it's just kind of an okay episode. Just a big race with all the goofy female characters. Nami was really great in this episode, although I have to admit that she was somewhat underplayed, and that's kind of a shame because her design is just so fun and nutty. I really freaking love it, and I truly hope that we'll get to see her return in the GBN world for the next couple of episodes. The intro indicates that we'll probably get to see that, and the end of the episode also shows that she's going to be building her very own gunpla, so I can't wait to see what that's all going to be about. This could be the moment where Nami officially becomes a gunpla fan, which is great. She's probably one of my favorite characters from the series just because of this episode right here. But again, this episode did a great job on focusing on the female characters from the series. The biggest takeaway from this episode, of course, is that Sarah is continuing to bring all of this danger to the GBN world. Whether she is some sort of living AI or a glitch which exists within the GBN, it's starting to cause all sorts of chaos, and the higher-ups of the GBN world are finally starting starting to take notice. It looks like everything is going to be officially revealed in the next episode, and I can't wait to see what it's all going to involve, if this is going to somehow be connected to that weird bird that's been following her around. Maybe Tsukasa is actually going to return and be a part of this story. Honestly, I would like the story to go in a much darker direction for the very end, if only to intensify things. Like, the way that I see it is that they discovered that Sarah is a glitch and something that must be destroyed. Of course, Riku would never want anything like this to happen, and someone's going to have to oppose him in that sense. And of all people, I think the greatest amount of drama they could add to it is if the actual champion himself wanted to get rid of Sarah, as he's so incredibly protective of the GBN world and trying to keep it pure. It would bring a really great dramatic tension-filled moment between these two characters. The guy he looks up to wants to destroy someone that he actually cares about. It probably won't go in that direction, but I just think that that would actually be kind of interesting. Where the actual story is going to go and how it's going to wrap up in the next couple of episodes remains to be seen, but you can bet your ass I'll definitely be there front and center when it's actually happening. So, I did praise this episode for the most part, and it was really fun, but it was still an episode of Gundam Build Divers, and in that sense, it was just okay. The animation, the artwork, the story, you know, it's impossible to compare it to the two previous seasons at this point, so I'm not going to do it. I'm going to try and take this series for what it is, and this episode right here for me is a 3 out of 5, which is an okay, fun, average episode. Not reinventing the wheel, but you'll certainly get some laughs and a lot of enjoyment out of it, and like I said, for the hardcore Gundam fans, you're certainly going to appreciate a lot of things about this episode. But I can't wait to see how it's all going to wrap up as we're getting this much closer to the finale. Who knows, we might even get a second season. So you heard my thoughts on this episode. I want to hear yours. Tell me what you thought about this episode of Gundam Build Divers in the comments section below. What did you think about the all-girls competition? Do you have a favorite female character from the series? What is the deal with Sarah? What do you think is going to happen with her in the finale? Give me all your thoughts. Let's get a discussion going in the comments section. I'll see you guys next time. And as always, stay down, baby.